American soldiers were found dead in Vietnam with their rifles taken apart, cleaning rods jammed deep into the barrel, hands frozen in the act of trying to make their weapon fire one last time. Entire squads reported that half their rifles failed in the middle of battle. Men wrote home begging their families for cleaning kits, convinced their own army had abandoned them. Only after hundreds had already died did the truth begin to surface. What killed them was not the jungle, not the enemy, but a chain of decisions made far from the battlefield. Decisions whose consequences would echo long after the shooting stopped. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to where the mistake truly began. When the Second World War ended, the United States Army faced a problem it could no longer ignore. Its infantry was armed with a chaotic mix of weapons, each firing different ammunition, each requiring separate logistics, training, and maintenance. Within a single squad, soldiers carried battle rifles, carbines, submachine guns, and machine guns, all competing for space in supply chains already stretched thin by global war. The conflict had revealed a brutal truth. Supplying ammunition was not just a matter of production, but of precision. Every soldier needed the correct caliber at the right time under fire, often in remote and hostile terrain. A single mistake could render a weapon useless. Multiply that across millions of troops, and the system began to crack. Manufacturing posed another burden. Different weapons required different factories, different spare parts, different magazines, and different training manuals. Instructors had to teach recruits how to operate a wide array of systems, each with its own quirks and limitations. In the chaos of modern warfare, this complexity was becoming a liability. As the dust settled after 1945, American military planners began searching for a solution. Not an incremental improvement, but a fundamental reset. One rifle, one caliber, one system that could simplify logistics, reduce training time, and prepare the army for the next global conflict that many believed was inevitable. This push did not happen in isolation. With the formation of the NATO alliance, the problem expanded beyond national borders. If another world war erupted, allied nations would need to resupply one another seamlessly. Ammunition compatibility became a strategic necessity, not a convenience. Out of this urgency came an agreement. NATO would standardize around a single rifle cartridge. That round would be the 7.62 by 51 mm NATO. Powerful, long-ranged, and familiar in concept, it seemed like the logical successor to the ammunition that had won the last war. What followed was an attempt to build the future on the foundation of the past, and that decision would set the stage for everything that came next. To fire the new NATO cartridge, the United States Army turned to a familiar idea. Instead of rethinking the rifle from the ground up, they refined what they already trusted. The result was the M16, essentially an updated version of the M1 Garand, redesigned to accept a detachable magazine and chambered in the new 7.62 NATO round. On paper, it looked like progress. The rifle fed from a 20-round magazine, used a powerful full-caliber cartridge, and could even fire in full automatic. It was built from steel and wood, solid and traditional, reflecting a mindset shaped by the last war rather than the next one. In reality, the M16 was a compromise that solved some problems while creating new ones. Loaded, it weighed close to 10 pounds. Its recoil was heavy, punishing in sustained fire. In full automatic, it was almost uncontrollable, climbing violently with each burst. The rifle was simply not designed to manage a full power cartridge in automatic fire. Very quickly, it became clear that the 7.62 NATO round was better suited to machine guns than individual infantry rifles. Weapons designed for suppressive fire could absorb the recoil and heat. A single soldier could not. The promise of a universal do-everything rifle was already starting to collapse. At the same time, military analysts were studying data from recent conflicts. Their conclusions challenged long-held assumptions. Most infantry engagements did not happen at long range. The majority of firefights occurred well within 300 yards. Beyond that distance, hits with standard rifles were rare, even under ideal conditions. This created an uncomfortable question. If soldiers were not engaging enemies at long range, why burden them with a heavy rifle firing a powerful cartridge designed for distances they rarely fought at? Submachine guns lacked range and accuracy, but full-power battle rifles were proving excessive. The M16, meant to unify the infantry, instead exposed a deeper problem. The Army was trying to force modern warfare into an outdated framework, and somewhere outside this rigid system, a radically different idea was already taking shape. As the limits of the M16 became harder to ignore, a different line of thinking began to emerge. Analysts studying combat data saw a clear pattern. Firefights were fast, chaotic, and close. Soldiers rarely engaged targets beyond 300 yards, and even more rarely hit anything at those distances. Accuracy under stress mattered more than raw power. This data suggested something radical. A lighter rifle firing a smaller cartridge could give soldiers more control, more ammunition, and more chances to hit their target. Instead of relying on a single powerful shot, effectiveness could come from speed, volume, and manageability. Within this shifting mindset, a new design philosophy took shape. Eugene Stoner, working at Armalite, approached the problem without the weight of tradition. He questioned steel and wood. He questioned heavy receivers. He questioned the assumption that recoil was something soldiers simply had to endure. The result was the AR-10. It was chambered in the same 7.62 NATO round, but it looked nothing like the rifles that came before it. Aircraft-grade aluminum replaced steel, plastic replaced wood. The rifle was lighter, straighter, and built around a new direct gas impingement system that vented gas directly back into the bolt carrier to cycle the action. This system reduced recoil and allowed the barrel and stock to sit in a straight line. The rifle no longer fought the shooter. It stayed flat, controllable, and modern. It was a glimpse of what infantry weapons could become. But Stoner did not stop there. Encouraged by battlefield data and emerging research into small-caliber, high-velocity rounds, he saw a greater opportunity. A lighter projectile moving faster could change everything. And with that realization, the AR-10 became the foundation for something even more ambitious. Stoner took the core ideas of the AR-10 and scaled them down. The new rifle was lighter, slimmer, and chambered for a radically different cartridge. This round was the .223 Remington, later standardized as 5.56 NATO. Small in diameter, light in weight, but driven at extremely high velocity. The result was the AR-15. Weighing under 7 pounds, it felt almost fragile compared to the steel rifles of the past. But in the hands of a soldier, it offered something no standard service rifle ever had: control. In semi-automatic fire, recoil was minimal. In full automatic, the rifle remained remarkably stable, allowing accurate bursts instead of wild muzzle climb. Its long 20-inch barrel pushed the small projectile to around 3,200 feet per second. The concept was simple. Speed would replace mass. Tests showed that when the bullet struck bone, it often tumbled and fragmented, producing severe wounds disproportionate to its size. In controlled conditions, it appeared capable of matching the lethality of much larger cartridges. On paper, it looked like the future. Soldiers could carry nearly 3 times as much ammunition for the same weight. Fatigue was reduced. Accuracy under stress improved. Everything pointed toward a new way of fighting. But combat would reveal a more complicated truth. In real engagements, the small, high-velocity round often passed straight through the body unless it struck vital organs. Enemies sometimes required multiple hits to be stopped. This was noted, debated, and quietly accepted as a trade-off. Yet none of this would become the rifle's greatest flaw. The real danger was not the bullet, not the recoil, not the design philosophy. It was something far more invisible and far more deadly. After a series of trials and evaluations, the rifle was formally adopted as the M16. For the U.S. military, it appeared to be the long-awaited solution. One lightweight weapon, one modern design capable of replacing the aging M14 and standardizing the infantry at last. The advantages were undeniable. For engagements under 300 yards, the rifle performed exceptionally well. Soldiers could carry significantly more ammunition without increasing their load. In theory, this meant more sustained firepower, greater mobility, and higher survival rates on the battlefield. As tensions in Southeast Asia escalated, early production M16 rifles still officially labeled experimental, were sent to Vietnam for field testing. They were issued to American military advisors and elite South Vietnamese units engaged in counterinsurgency operations against communist guerrillas. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Soldiers praised the rifle's ergonomics, accuracy, and light weight. In dense jungle terrain, the M16 was easier to carry, faster to bring on target, and less exhausting on long patrols. Its synthetic stock did not swell or warp in the humid climate like the wooden furniture of the M14. Reports described the rifle as superior in nearly every way to the weapons it was meant to replace. Thousands of rounds were fired in training and combat with minimal malfunctions. In mud, dirt, and tropical heat, the M16 appeared reliable and forgiving. These early successes cemented the rifle's reputation within the command structure. To decision-makers far from the jungle, the verdict seemed clear. The M16 was not just acceptable, it was the future. And with that confidence, the rifle was rushed into full-scale production just as the war was about to change. In 1965, the war in Vietnam escalated into full-scale ground combat. American infantry units arrived in large numbers, each soldier carrying a sleek black rifle they had been told represented the future of warfare. They trusted it without question. The first major firefights shattered that belief. After only a few magazines, rifles began to fail. Triggers were pulled and nothing happened. Soldiers picked up weapons from wounded comrades and kept fighting until those rifles jammed as well. Reports spread rapidly, half the rifles in a squad seizing in the middle of battle. Men found dead beside their weapons, torn apart, bolts locked open, cleaning rods jammed into barrels as they tried desperately to make the rifle work one last time. Some were forced into hand-to-hand combat, using bayonets, rifle stocks, knives, even helmets. Anyone with a sidearm was suddenly valuable. One platoon leader reported that 32 of 80 rifles malfunctioned in a single engagement, turning the fight into chaos and close-range killing. Even routine patrols became dangerous. A few bursts were enough to leave a soldier defenseless if fire was returned. Fear replaced confidence. No one understood how a rifle praised as revolutionary had failed so completely, and the truth was still hidden far from the jungle. As casualties mounted, soldiers searched for answers on their own. One problem became impossible to ignore. The M16 had been issued without cleaning kits, not delayed, not limited, completely absent. Tens of thousands of rifles were sent into a tropical war zone with no tools to maintain them. The rifle had been described as self-cleaning. Manuals barely mentioned maintenance. In the jungle, this claim collapsed almost immediately. Mud, moisture, and powder residue accumulated fast. Barrels clogged so badly that light would not pass through them. Desperate soldiers wrote home asking their families to mail cleaning rods, gun oil, anything that might keep the rifle alive. In one recorded incident, the only man in a platoon with a cleaning rod ran from position to position during a firefight, clearing jams for others until he was shot and killed. The most common failure was terrifyingly simple. Spent casings expanded, their rims tore off, and they remained stuck in the chamber. The only way to clear the rifle was to ram the casing out from the muzzle. Without a rod, the weapon was dead. Anger replaced confusion. Soldiers could not understand why a rifle that worked flawlessly in testing was now betraying them in combat. Many began carrying extra grenades. Some tried to obtain pistols. Others reverted to old World War II weapons that were supposed to be obsolete. The jungle was blamed. The climate was blamed. But none of it was true. The real cause had nothing to do with Vietnam, and it was about to be uncovered. Investigators were eventually sent to determine why the rifle was failing so catastrophically. What they uncovered pointed not to the battlefield, but to a decision made years earlier. During early development, the AR-15 had been tested with IMR stick powder, a propellant that burned predictably, produced moderate pressure, and left relatively little residue. During testing and even early field use, the rifle functioned reliably with this ammunition. The disastrous malfunctions seen in Vietnam did not appear. But in 1964, as the war approached full scale, control of ammunition procurement shifted to the Army Ordnance Department. Without conducting proper testing and without consulting the rifle's designer, the powder type was changed. IMR, was replaced with WC-846, commonly known as ball powder. It was cheaper, easier to mass produce, and already stockpiled in enormous quantities from the Second World War. This change altered everything. Ball powder burned faster and produced higher pressure. The bolts cycled more violently. The rate of fire climbed beyond 1,000 rounds per minute. The rifle was never designed to operate under these conditions. Cartridge cases deformed and swelled after firing. Rims tore off during extraction. Spent casings remained stuck in the chamber, creating the very jams soldiers were dying with in their hands. At the same time, ball powder left far more unburned residue. That residue traveled through the gas system and into the heart of the rifle. When it cooled, it hardened, choking the mechanism. With no cleaning kits and no training, the M16 became a machine that failed its user at the worst possible moment. This was not an accident of war. It was the result of a single untested decision made just before American soldiers were sent to fight and die. The powder change was only the beginning. Instead of acknowledging the root cause, the system layered new mistakes on top of the old ones. The Army Ordnance Department insisted on adding a forward assist, a feature the rifle's designer openly opposed. The M16 had been designed to eject faulty rounds automatically. If a cartridge failed to chamber, the soldier could cycle the charging handle and clear it. The forward assist encouraged the opposite. It allowed a round to be forced into the chamber, deforming the casing and locking it in place with no way to extract it. At the same time, magazines were treated as disposable. Early 20-round magazines were cheaply made from thin aluminum. Feed lips bent, springs weakened, rounds jammed during feeding. Soldiers tapped magazines against their helmets to shake cartridges loose before inserting them, a habit born from necessity, not training. These problems compounded each other in combat. A rifle already fouled with residue was fed by unreliable magazines and encouraged to force rounds into a dirty chamber. Failure became inevitable. Reports of malfunctions were pushed down the chain of command. Responsibility dissolved as it moved upward. By the time letters from soldiers reached the public in large numbers, the damage had already been done. The crisis could no longer be hidden. Before assigning blame, the military faced a more immediate problem. Soldiers were dying with rifles that did not work, and that had to stop. Once public pressure mounted, action finally followed. Cleaning kits and proper manuals were rushed to frontline units. New rifles were redesigned with a small trapdoor in the stock, ensuring every soldier carried the tools needed to keep the weapon alive. Training was updated to emphasize maintenance in field conditions. Technical fixes followed. Chambers were chrome-lined to resist corrosion and ease extraction. Soon after, the bore was lined as well. Stronger buffers and springs reduced the rate of fire to its intended level, lowering stress on internal parts. The powder was reformulated to burn cleaner and more consistently. Better magazines began to replace the disposable ones. Slowly, the rifle became what it had been during testing: reliable, controllable. Trust returned, but only after the cost had already been paid. Congress held hearings. Investigators spoke of criminal negligence, even deliberate sabotage. The Army Ordnance Department was dissolved. Springfield Armory was closed in 1968. Yet no individual was fired, prosecuted, or demoted. The rifle was reborn as the M16A1. It would evolve further, eventually giving rise to the M4. The weapon survived. The system survived. Many soldiers did not. The M16 would go on to define modern American infantry. Its descendants would serve for decades, refined, trusted, and defended as symbols of technological superiority. History would remember the rifle as a success. What it would not easily remember were the early years. The letters written home, the rifles jammed in mid-fight, the men forced to close distance with knives and bare hands because a decision made in an office had stripped them of their weapon. The failure was never just mechanical, it was institutional. A system that valued cost, speed, and authority over testing, accountability, and lives. The jungle did not break the M16. The enemy did not sabotage it. It failed because the people responsible were never forced to answer for what they changed. And that is the quiet truth buried beneath the official narrative. The rifle was fixed. The system was not.